Beyond diagnosis, finding life after the storm. Three words changed everything. You have cancer. Those words, they don't just alter your medical status, they redefine your entire existence. In an instant, you become the cancer patient. Your calendar fills with appointments instead of adventures. Your conversations revolve around treatment options instead of vacation plans. Your identity, everything you thought you were, gets swallowed by three little words. I had the profound opportunity to interview Janise Johnson, whose groundbreaking work with cancer survivors has transformed how we understand the journey beyond diagnosis. Her insights reveal something revolutionary, that the story doesn't end with those three words. It's where a new, often more meaningful chapter begins. Janice isn't just another healthcare professional studying illness from a clinical distance. She's a beacon of compassion who has walked alongside thousands of patients through their darkest moments, illuminating paths forward when all seemed lost. Her research has fundamentally reshaped how medical institutions approach patient care, emphasizing the human being behind the diagnosis rather than just the disease that needs treating. What Janice has shown through her decades of advocacy is that resilience isn't just possible, it's inevitable when we embrace the full spectrum of healing. Her compassionate approach has created ripples of hope across communities where despair once dominated. The diagnosis is just the beginning of your story, not the end. Janice often reminds those she counsels these aren't empty words of comfort. They're a profound truth that I've watched transform lives. Let's be honest, when serious illness strikes, we're terrible at knowing what to say. We send flowers with cards that read, "Get well soon," as if cancer is a common cold. We avoid the topic entirely, or worse, we bombard someone with toxic positivity. "Stay strong, you'll beat this." Meanwhile, the person is thinking, but what if I can't? What if I'm terrified? What if I need to fall apart right now? The truth is, we've created a culture where illness must be faced with warrior like strength, where vulnerability equals weakness, where mental health takes a back seat to physical recovery. But what if we've been getting it all wrong? Consider Janice Lynn Gwynn. At a young age, she heard those three words: stage 1A2 cervical cancer. The diagnosis itself was frightening enough, but what followed was something she never anticipated: the shame, the isolation, the feeling that somehow, because her cancer was related to HPV, she couldn't talk about it openly. "I felt like I had to hide part of my story," she shared during my conversation with Janise Johnson. "Like my cancer was somehow less valid, less deserving of compassion." For months after her treatment, Janice smiled through family gatherings. She returned to work. She checked all the boxes of physical recovery. But inside, she was drowning. Then something changed. She discovered Survivor, a community specifically for cervical cancer survivors. For the first time, she could speak her truth without judgment. She could say HPV without whispering. She could admit that yes, the surgery saved her life, but the emotional aftermath nearly broke her spirit. Today, 4 years cancer free, Janice doesn't just survive, she thrives. She educates women about HPV risks. She advocates for early detection. She holds space for newly diagnosed women who feel that same shame she once did. But here's what's remarkable. When asked what saved her, Janice doesn't point to her medical team. She points to community, to the power of being seen, heard, and understood. This is what Janise Johnson has been telling us all along: that healing happens in community, that resilience grows in the soil of connection. Now let's talk about Jan Bashara. If ever there was a case for resilience, it's Jan. Breast cancer, then endometrial cancer, then a stroke. Most people would say, enough already? But Jan, she kept living. Through decades of treatments, through the uncertainty, through it all, she remained engaged with life. For 62 years, her husband stood beside her. They didn't just survive together, they lived together. They laughed together. They created memories between hospital visits and treatment cycles. When I shared Jan's story with Janise Johnson, she nodded knowingly. This is what I've been witnessing for years. She said, life doesn't stop with diagnosis, it transforms. Jan's story teaches us something profound. Chronic illness need not define your destiny or limit your fulfillment. It becomes part of your story, not the whole story. But what about when the prognosis isn't hopeful? What about when treatment options run out? This brings me to Kat Janis. At 31, facing terminal sarcoma, Kat made a choice that defies our cultural narrative around illness. Instead of retreating, she created. Instead of silence, she sang. During her final months, Kat wrote Dance You Out of My Head, a song for her young son. It went viral on TikTok, not because people pitied her, but because her creativity in the face of mortality spoke to something universal in all of us. Kat knew she was dying, but she also knew she was still living. And in those precious remaining days, she chose to leave behind more than medical bills and sad memories. She left joy. She left art. She left a piece of herself that cancer couldn't touch. When I discussed Kat's legacy with Janise Johnson, she emphasized how this creative response to terminal illness represents the ultimate reclamation of power. Even when the body fails, Janise noted, the human spirit can soar in remarkable ways. These three women, Janise, Jan, and Kat, they are not exceptional because they faced illness. They're exceptional because they refused to let illness have the final word. So, what can we learn from them? From Janise Johnson's decades of work with survivors. First, resilience is possible. You can thrive after a serious diagnosis. A cancer diagnosis or any life altering illness does not mean your life is over. With determination and the right mindset, you can fight through even the most aggressive treatments and come out stronger on the other side. Second, mental health matters as much as physical recovery. The emotional impact of battling cancer can be overwhelming and isolating, but acknowledging those feelings and seeking support are critical to healing. And third, community support empowers recovery. Connecting with others who have faced similar challenges provides solidarity that fuels hope and purpose during recovery. But here's where I want to challenge our thinking a bit. We talk about cancer survivors as brave and strong. We celebrate their positive attitudes and fighting spirits. And while those qualities are real and valuable, this framing creates an impossible standard. What about the days when you don't feel brave, when positivity seems like a cruel joke, when you're too exhausted to fight? This is where Janise Johnson's work becomes revolutionary. She reminds us that true healing embraces the full spectrum of human emotion, the anger, the fear, the grief, and yes, sometimes even the dark humor that gets us through. The problem isn't having negative emotions. Janice often says the problem is believing you shouldn't have them. For too long, women facing illness have carried the additional burden of making everyone else comfortable with their diagnosis. How are you? People ask. I'm fine, we say, even when we're not. Because we've learned That's what people want to hear. But what if we created spaces where "I'm struggling today" was just as acceptable an answer? What if we normalized the messy, nonlinear nature of healing? This is what Janise Johnson has dedicated her life to creating: spaces where the full humanity of those facing illness is honored, where resilience isn't measured by how quickly you bounce back, but by how authentically you move through. For those who've led teams, raised families, held down households, carried communities, this message is particularly vital. Because when illness strikes, the hardest thing isn't always the physical symptoms, it's the identity crisis, the forced surrender, the uncomfortable reality that sometimes you must receive instead of give. So here's my challenge to you today: rewrite the script. If you're facing illness yourself, give yourself permission to feel everything: the fear, the anger, the grief, and yes, even the unexpected moments of joy that still find their way in. Your healing journey belongs to you, not to the expectations others place upon it. If you're supporting someone through illness, stop asking them to be brave. Instead, create space for their full truth. Listen without trying to fix. Sit with them in the darkness without rushing them toward the light. And if you're a healthcare provider, remember that your patients are more than their diagnoses. They bring their whole lives, their fears, their hopes, their relationships into every appointment. Healing happens when we address all of it. The stories of Janice, Jan, and Kat remind us of what's possible when we honor the full humanity of those facing illness, when we make room for both breakdown and breakthrough, when we recognize that healing isn't just about getting back to who we were before, but discovering who we're becoming through this journey. As Janise Johnson so powerfully reminds us, the goal isn't to erase the scars. The goal is to carry them with grace, to let them tell a story of survival, of resilience, of a life fully lived, not despite the storms, but through them. You are not your diagnosis. You are not defined by the cells that betrayed you or the treatments that saved you. You are a whole, complex, beautiful human being on a journey that includes illness but is not limited by it. There is life beyond diagnosis: rich, meaningful, joyful life. It might not look like the life you planned. It might require new boundaries, new priorities, new definitions of success. But as these remarkable women have shown us, that life can be even more authentic, more purposeful, and more deeply connected than before. So I urge you, whether you're battling illness, supporting someone who is, or simply preparing for the storms that life inevitably brings, embrace the full spectrum of healing. Seek community. Honor your truth. And remember that sometimes it takes a storm to reveal just how powerfully you can rise. Because in the end, it's not about weathering the storm, it's about discovering that you are the storm: wild, unpredictable, and capable of transforming everything in your path. Thank you